Pastor's Heart, and Dominic Steele here, and David and Kathy Thurston are with me today, and we're thinking about managing your own household and how we can actually do better ourselves in ministry and so be then better able to pastor the flock that God has given us. We're asking for your assistance though first. We'd appreciate it if you could let friends know about the Pastor's Heart. If you've got a peer in ministry, perhaps you enjoy this discussion, want to let them know and they might benefit as well. You could share it on Facebook. Hey, here's a thing. It'd be great if you subscribed. If you're on the Apple device, it's bit.ly/thepastor'sapple. If you're on an Android device, it's bit.ly/thepastor'sandroid. If you're on Spotify, bit.ly/thepastor'sspotify. And we're increasingly encouraged by the number of people who have signed up on YouTube. And to do that, it's bit.ly/thepastor'syoutube. Now, David and Kathy Thurston, thanks so much for coming in to
Great to be here.
Talk to us from Queensland.
Queensland, QLD.
Although we used to be next door neighbours.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, David and I used to see each other sometimes at a kids' sport on Saturday mornings.
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely.
so Stanmore and Five Dock are our most recent homes.
Yeah. The move to Queensland, what brought it about?
Well, we were thinking after 33 years of ministry, pastoral ministry, that we would like to be doing something that was different. And we'd been doing some work in mentoring, and Kath had been doing some work in consultancy, church consultancy. And we were talking to Steve Cree about the possibility of doing something somewhere else. And he said, well, how about we manufacture a job for you? And so he invited us to do a new ministry out of Creek Road, or Living Church now, called Church to Church.
Yeah, and well, before we talk about the future, let's talk about the pastoral mentoring. And one of the things I read was 80 people you've mentored over 33 years. Just what does it look like to me? I mean, mentoring is a topic that I've kind of wanted to do on the Pastor's Heart, but we haven't actually got to it yet. So just kind of nibble around that area for us. Yeah.
Well, I can start off by telling you a bit about our own experience. So out of college, we had 5 years in the country between Wagga and Albury in a little town called Henty.
Yep.
So in the Presbyterian system, most of the guys would exit to a country placement, and that's a very isolating experience. And I think that most young guys in their first parish would find that both isolating from family and also from their colleagues. And that was certainly our experience. So we were finding ways to keep up with our college friends that were in the Riverina at the time.
I heard somebody say, and I think they were a little bit cynical, but if you're out there on your own and you're struggling and you're thinking, I'm hoping the cavalry will come, don't worry,
Yes.
it won't.
They won't come. They won't come. So finding ways of keeping up with colleagues and managing family, extended family from a distance without support, that's a challenge. So when we came back to Sydney, we started to have theological students coming to our church to train, and we loved that. We loved sharing our lives with them. We had small children at the time, and we just found we would spend time talking to them about our own experiences in ministry, and that led to then more students coming to share time with us in church, and we loved being able to talk, Dave sharing with the guys and me meeting with the wives. So that's how that number of people has developed since 1990 when we came back to Sydney.
And what kind of continued relationship have you had with them, Dave?
Well, it depends on the person. So there's always an open invitation that if ever they find themselves wanting to have a chat on the phone, they can just pick it up. And possibly, if they're finding themselves out of depth, just to have a conversation partner, somebody who's got a few more scars than they do, and to be able to talk about that. And we talk about especially them in that situation and what it means to be a Christ-like leader within a church in that sort of situation, and maybe what are some outcomes that they can work on, and what are some sometimes strategies that they can adopt. So it's mentoring. I think we've got a tighter definition than what we had when we were back in the Parramatta days. But certainly it's wanting to pass on to younger persons in ministry. Experience, but also sharing out of your own brokenness. So one of the things that Kath and I, it hasn't always been easy being in ministry.
And I mean, that's actually one of our touch points in the pastor's heart, that we try to drill down on what God has done in your heart in the journey of Christian ministry. And so do you want to share maybe an episode, a season in life that's been a complex journey that God has led you through? Yeah.
There's lots of them. Look, I would say that probably one of the most difficult times and was one of the most joyful times was at the church at Parramatta. God bless that in all sorts of extraordinary ways. Our first week we had 30 people. The next week we had 13, so it was a little bit of an Irish revival, really. It sort of went backwards.
So was this a church plant? Or
Yes.
So it was, yeah, well...
Yeah, church
okay.
plant.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. And we grew to about 200 very quickly. All the leadership was about 30. And I think one of the things that happens is we didn't understand the nature of how church size changes what you do. And there are a whole bunch of tensions that invaded that situation. And in the end, it ended up with us taking another position. Rather than stay in all the pain, we opted to go somewhere else. That was a very big learning time, and the time after that, there was lots of pain. There had to be a lot of self-reflection. There had to be a lot of understanding, and basically after that, I said, look, I'm never going to do church planting ever again. And 3 years later, we did Central Sydney.
Yeah.
So
Just take us back to some of the learning points. I mean, like, what would you say to David, who was planning a church at Parramatta, if you could just have warned him on 2 or 3 things, you know?
Yeah. Look, this sounds a little self-serving, but I'll say it anyway. Somebody asked me a similar question about 3 weeks ago. I think what I needed was I needed a mentor. I needed somebody who had been through those sorts of experiences, and somebody who could say, have you thought about the fact that this might not be about you, and it mightn't be a power play that's going on, and even if it is, you need to approach this very differently. You need to calm who you are in Christ. You need to understand that this is not about you, that you need to be somebody who is able to speak into this situation in a very different way. I've been a depressive since I was 13. It's a little bit like being an alcoholic. I can say I'm a depressive, but I haven't been depressed for 15 years or something like that. But I think I was highly anxious in that situation. I was wanting to make sure that I was going to be seen to be successful, and that all went to hell in a hatbox, really. So I think having somebody who is able to speak into that situation, say, look, what's really going on here for you? And here's a way of approaching this in a way that you're going to have to grow up in Christ. You're going to have to admit that there are buttons and there are hooks that you have that sin grabs a hold of, and you need to look at this and by the Spirit's power deal with this if you're going to continue to lead this well. So I think having somebody who had the wisdom to speak into the young David Thurston, the brash David Thurston, at 30 you should be brash and you should be trying to do that, but somebody who could say, can we just slow down? Can we remember what you're here for? God uses this to mature you. God uses this to grow you up in Jesus. I just wanted to solve the problem and come up with a new strategy to fix it all up. And that's not the way God works. Yeah.
Looking back, Kathy, what are your reflections there of what was going on?
I would say that I think we're in a very different position now from where we were. That was 96. Not us, but in terms of our church community being aware of the sorts of ways that ministry is a difficult job. these days, I think hopefully we have a lot more help available to people in that very situation, both understanding the church dynamics sort of thing, but also not being so judgmental of people who are struggling and are not feeling that we need to be independent of others and just portraying an external thing. We don't want to admit that we're actually not coping, that we have problems, we don't know what to do. We're more eager, hopefully, to ask for help. But I think there is more help out there as well. I think there are people who both have skills and who are wanting to help, who are wanting to step in and walk alongside us so that we can learn from the experience and actually go on and continue and persevere in ministry. Because that's the thing that we've seen over many years, that when young guys have struck a problem, either from lack of training or just lack of skills or experience, they've actually fallen out of ministry. And there was no need for that to happen, but there wasn't someone who could help them to see a way forward, to walk through it, to learn from it, and to be able to keep going.
David, I wasn't planning to go down this line. I didn't know that you were going to take us to this topic, but if I could just push you on that a little bit more, because a lot of people have grown churches to just under 200 and then floundered, and not known how to get past.
Sure.
And so from hindsight, we'd say, looking from the outside, from just what you've told us now, you'd say, well, it's normal to not know what to do when you get to 180, and for things to kind of
not work.
Yeah.
Yes. So
what would you be advised? I mean, and there'd be people listening to us now who are stuck at 100. A lot of people listening to us now who are stuck at 180. And can't break through that 200 barrier. And so, what would you say?
Well, I think it's first of all understanding that size does matter, and it mattered in the early church, and it matters today. And the most dangerous thing to do is, as you're moving through those different sizes, as you're growing, whether it's growing up or growing down, to recognise that those shifts in size requires a shift in the way that you behave, a shift in the way you communicate, a shift in all sorts of things. So I think within that Prezi situation, it certainly meant a different role for myself and a different role for the leadership. And in fact, breaking that 200 barrier, if we talk about it like that, all the other changes, moving from a family to a pastor size, so the program size thing is around about that 200 to 350, and then the corporate, and of course there's other ones now that people have come up with. The really interesting thing about that is the hardest barrier to break. That barrier, because you have to change two things. The pastor has to change the way he operates, and the church has to change the way it operates. And it's the most frequently failed out hurdle, because it's requiring two changes at the same time. And I think you get this twisting that can occur at that time. So if you're not really sure of what's going on, then you're not able to alert people and lead people into the process of change that does need to take place.
So what would your advice be? Give me the advice to the pastor, and then give me the advice that the pastor should be educating the church on.
So I think what the pastor needs to do is he does need to understand how size does change the way communications happen within the church, and also his ability to pastor people. It's a very different situation moving from the 150 through to the 350. It's impossible to be able to be directly involved pastorally with all of those people. For a lot of ministers, a lot of pastors, they don't want to lose that connection. And so...
And you can see that if I can just speak into your life a little bit, make a comment on your Facebook post or whatever it is, then I just hold on to that little bit of connection with you.
So I would say the first thing you want to do is to find someone who can walk through with the pastor to help them do that. But I guess the primary question is, do you want to do it? So the pastor needs to be committed to that.
Does the church want to do it?
Does the church want to do it? That's right, because There's
Well,
been-
in the end, you've got to persuade the church to do it.
You
don't
do.
I mean, everybody will say, in principle, I want to, but I keep reverting to the fact that I want to be close to the pastor.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there are choices, because the choice would be you could perhaps then split and do two smaller congregations. So there are options. That's up to the congregation to decide which way they want to go. But both need to understand what the choices are and what the implications for them are.
But growth groups are going to need to change.
Yeah.
Pastoral care is going to need to change. So what Kathy's saying about getting somebody who's been there and transitioned, that's the best conversation to have with anybody. You can grab a book, there are lots of good books about it, but having the conversation with a real life situation, a real life person where you can say, well, I'm bumping up against this.
And that's kind of what you're doing in this church
Yeah.
to church, isn't it? So just tell us what you're doing now on what is this church to church? Yeah.
Okay, so Church to Church is a new ministry out of Living Church in Brisbane, and they've been developing resources there over many years and came to the point where they want to share those resources. But as we talked further, we wanted to not just provide resources, but also provide support for the use of those resources. So the package, our main goal is working with partner churches who then will be sharing our resources. So that means they'll be preaching the same sermon
Preaching in
series.
sync, and we talked to
in sync
Steve Cree
with-
about
That's
a little
right,
while
with
ago
the
about
team
that, yeah.
preaching, and they're part of the team preaching program. But along with that, we want to provide the pastoral couple with mentoring. So that's Dave mentors the husband, the pastor, and I mentor the wife.
And what's it look like? So somebody who's part of this, I mean, you've been doing it for a year now, so you obviously start with the first person, and now you've got 20 or so, I don't know how many, but
We've got 5 partner churches.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's made up of 9 couples that we're working with.
And Kath's
in the
mentoring,
scheme.
what, 15?
Yeah, so
about
some
28.
outside of that network as
Yeah.
well.
outside that network,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, mentoring women in ministry, what do you do?
So I think one of the really first places to start is we use the John Mark Ministry model of mentoring, and that is a model where the mentoree, we call them, the person being mentored, sets the curriculum, if you like. There is not a formal curriculum. They set that depending on what they want to do in the sessions, and we meet with them for 10 1.5-hour sessions over the year.
Right.
So most of our partner couples are outside Brisbane. In fact, they all are outside Brisbane. So we do that over Skype or FaceTime, and then we try and see them once a term face to face.
Right. Cool. Okay. In your little bio notes, it had, I'm caring for the spiritual, emotional, relational, and theological health of the person. As I think spiritual health, my mind goes to, I'm thinking of women and men who've got theology degrees, who we've worked with in ministry, who now no longer would hold the faith of Jesus, you know. And I imagine you've been in, and yet they probably were working out they didn't hold the faith of Jesus anymore while they had a pastoral job. Yeah. I imagine you've had some complex conversations in those areas. Yeah.
I think there needs to be a joining with the spiritual and the emotional. I mean, we are integrated beings.
Yep.
And we've got to bring those things together. There's a fellow called Peter Scazzero, and he says, I think this is absolutely true, you cannot be spiritually mature while being emotionally immature. You actually need the two that go together. And so part of the conversation that you have, that we have with our mentorees, is working out what God's doing in their life and what the painful experiences are, or what the hassles are that they're having, and actually digging down there and finding out where they need to grow up. And they normally don't come to us for mentoring unless they are keen on growing up, even if it's painful. And there's always growing pains in this sort of stuff. In terms of people who are moving out of ministry, sometimes you don't know who they are But I've had a few people who have said after a year or so, they've said to me, if we hadn't have done this, we would probably be out of ministry by this stage.
Yeah.
So I tend to know after the fact rather than before.
So that's great in that you've been doing preventative medicine.
Yes.
So that's fantastic.
And that's the most important medicine to do, I think. So it's good to triage. It's good when there's an emergency, you sort of get them the heart pumping and they're able to sort of then move on to better care. But preventative medicine is wonderful.
And the emotional health, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure that's something you've been talking to lots of women about.
Yeah, lots of women. And I think that's understanding the focus of mentoring is really important. I think that would be the question that most people ask us, you know, how's mentoring different from coaching? And I guess what we would like to say is that with mentoring, our focus is on building godly Christian character. And we would see coaching as more based around skill training. But so Dave does a lot more talking to pastors about the skills because you're talking about what is happening on the ground and how they're going to manage that. But we don't want to lose the primary focus, which is growing godly
who are
character.
you before God?
Exactly.
Yes.
And, you know, women say to me that there is no one else that they have those conversations with, which we sort of think that's really sad because do you not have a Christian friend that you can be talking about your relationship with God or your spouse? And a lot of them don't have that. And
Well, it's the complexity of, I'm imagining, well, I would say for me, one of the lines I've had is, when I think about what to share with you, I'm thinking, will it help you grow in Jesus? Do you know? And if I think this story, this struggle that I'm potentially going to share with you is not going to help you grow in Jesus, then I'm going to keep it to myself. Do you know? And I would think that's a fairly frequent pattern of behaviour for those of us in Christian ministry. Do you know? But then I do need somebody a bit older and wiser who is not going to be damaged by me sharing this story for me to share that story with and ask them to help me grow in Jesus ask me to help me grow in Jesus. Do you want to bounce around with that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things there. One of the really important things, and I believe sharing stories is an important part of it, an equally important part of it is actually asking really good questions that open up a topic. I think that oftentimes what happens in ministry is that we do have a sense of having to feel like we have to keep it all together, and we have a sense of we've got to keep it together for other people looking on. To be able to ask questions that open a person up, that then allows them to see inconsistencies, immaturities, reactivity that comes from their past or from past hurts or whatever it is, suddenly allows a space for the Spirit to do His work and to be able to have those conversations where maybe sharing a story might actually work. So they go, okay, you've gone through this as well and you haven't died from it. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit more.
So I can see the super helpfulness of being able to share that story with a mentor. Although if I go back to you at Parramatta, you're probably not going to be feeling vulnerable to share that story with one of the people you're in conflict with in the leadership group at the church.
You know, I burned out at Parramatta. I should say, Parramatta was an extraordinary experience. We loved Parramatta. It was very painful leaving Parramatta. But we really didn't share much of what was going on at all because we didn't want to divide a church that we had worked so hard and God had blessed so much. And it's still going, and praise God for that. It's one of those things when you've been injured, you don't feel like being vulnerable again. And
which is actually a difficulty in preaching, because I find the best preaching is when I am vulnerable. And yet, our church is going really well at the moment, but there was a season 9 years ago when we were having that rocky time, and I definitely was finding it extremely difficult to be vulnerable in the pulpit when I was feeling that was conflict all around me.
Yeah, but I think when you choose to confront whatever that is that's going on at the time and work through that, and are able then to look back, you're in a different position to be vulnerable, and also to be able to share the things that you've learnt from that. So hence the importance of actually not burying what it is that is the difficulty in yourself, or the sinful behaviour, or the family of origin and stuff that you don't want to deal with. Because to push through that and to see God being able to meet you there and in his power transform you, that has so much potential then for you being able to both share a different relationship with God, but also a different part of yourself with your congregation. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming in to talk to us.
Pleasure.
David and Kathy Thurston have been my guests on The Pastor's Heart, and they're at Church to Church, and we will put a link to their website in the notes below this video.